Hello and welcome back to Oxygen Not Included, sort of an intermission episode here while I discuss sort of the real world stuff that's going on with Oxygen Not Included. So this is probably going to be a little bit old news by the time that this episode comes out because I kind of record them whenever I have time to do a play session and then I upload them sort of while I'm working on other things. But Oxygen Not Included has been given a release date for late May, which at the time of this recording is about 2 months from now. And we're also about 3 weeks away from a new update, which will not really add new major content, but make some significant changes. And the release will include new content, 3 new biomes, and a bunch of new critters. So what are we going to do with the series? Well, I kind of got delayed a little bit in making progress on this because there was roughly a month and a half where it was a combination of me going on vacation and getting sick, where I didn't really get to record anything. And as a consequence, we're here at cycle 621, and there are a million things that I still want to do. Number one, I plan on making a dormitory system where we had separate living quarters for different sort of classes of dupes, that we'd have maybe like a little area over here where all the ranchers lived, and then they would take little transit tubes to ranches around the base to go manage slicksters or hatches or drecos. I wanted a space dormitory up here around this area where they would have some area overlooking like a field of rockets, and they'd go about doing their stuff. Ideally, I was actually planning on having them all be clones of the same dupe, like having all of them be clones of Stinky. That would require a lot of time, but I imagine sort of a dormitory full of Stinky astronauts would be kind of cool. So I wanted separate living quarters and to really simplify the transit system down to a series of transit tube accesses, which is a major project and probably not something we're going to get around to doing. I wanted to set up sleet wheat production, which is going to require dirt, which actually is not that difficult of a thing on this map just because we have such huge access to all this water. There's tons of polluted water coming out this map. We have 3 cool slush geysers, which is just I think the most I've ever had is two cool slush geysers. So 3 is like, I don't know if they changed the way map generation works or if we just got lucky, but one of the 2 happened. We still don't have our whole space scanner / regolith clearing array. Part of that is, I guess, intentional because I just don't like the way a lot of those systems look, and I need some time to really hunt around for a good design. One that isn't just like, I mean, the simple way is you basically build a wall 2 tiles away from the top, right, that just stretches across the entire thing, and you're pretty much good to go, right? That's a pretty simple system, but it's so ugly to me. I don't know. We'll think about that in a bit. I wanted to work on an oil boiler. I wanted to basically cracking it into petroleum or into natural gas. I wanted to work on the regolith melter, basically using the high temperatures that you can get from the glass forge to melt down regolith, along with sort of a reheating process using the metal refinery, because you can set up your metal refineries such that you put them in a vacuum and you insulate the tile like right here, I think it is, and you can basically have them heat up a coolant, which will probably be something like molten iron, molten gold, molten copper, something like that, and use that to keep your magma melting. So I want to work on a magma melter to melt down our regolith. I want to work on some sort of centralized power facility, usually a power spine, but I kind of also wanted to work on a switched capacitor transformer. So instead of using the power transformers here, you basically use power shutoffs in combination with a battery array, and you're able to basically set it up so that what happens is you have a huge source of power here, but the game only the game only says something is overloaded if the consumption is too high, right? You can have as much power as you want on a line as long as the consumption isn't higher than the limit of that line. And basically what you do is you set up like battery here, here, battery here, here, and then you have a power shutoff so that when these batteries are charged, the power shutoff says, okay, disconnect these batteries from the main line and connect them to your power supply, and at the same time, disconnect these batteries from your power supply and connect them to the main line. And basically what happens is all your power supply is powering up some set of batteries. As soon as those batteries are charged, they then disconnect themselves from the power supply and are used to supply whatever you're powering in your base. So I wanted to play around with that. I think switch capacitor transformers are a really cool idea, but that also is something I probably don't have enough time to really work on. Even some basic stuff, like we just have this sort of med bay, which is just in spare space that we had with our ranches. Like having a proper med bay. I mean, we even have, just there's literally a room where we've just allowed a bunch of germs to exist because we don't really have a germ problem in the base, so we're good. But like showers, right? We don't have showers in the base. I like to do my showers where there's some privacy for the dupes. Set them up on the side, but showers is a project. There's just general beautification of the base, right? Making the decor all nice. Adding in little things, like if an area is supposed to be kind of a place where researchers are, then just setting up like a supercomputer or two, even if they're not hooked up and not using anything, just to kind of add to the decor of the place or the way that the place looks is nice. So a lot of base beautification. Also, one of the projects, sort of a challenge I want to work on is reaching the lowest possible point that we can reach on the map. So basically, digging in to like probably around here and cooling off all this magma. That is also something we're probably not going to have enough time to do, but sort of an interesting challenge. Can you set up an apartment complex at the lowest possible point you can get to in your map? Is a challenge. Also, just getting more rockets, right? We're doing all this rocketry stuff, doing experiments with internal rocket bays and whatnot. Getting a bunch more rockets off and running would also be nice. So there are dozens of projects that I want to work on in this base, but the reality is that with the game releasing basically in a couple months, that only gives me, maybe like 8, 9, 10 play sessions or so before we're in release. And I also just kind of I don't have fun playing a base when I know just like a couple weeks down the road I'm going to switch over to a different thing, right? That I'm going to restart my base. Like I don't like that impending feeling of dread. Even now, just 2 months out, I'm feeling that dread of, oh, but why am I doing this? Because I'm just going to start a new base and I want to work on that base. So I'm not sure I'm going to be playing the game much, say, in the 3 weeks or so after 3 weeks before release. I do want to play around with the new stuff, though, and so I kind of want to have just this intermission to say, what am I going to try and achieve? Right? What are the goals that I'm going to try and achieve with this base before I stop playing and start waiting for the update? So here are the things that I've decided on. Here are the things that I've kind of narrowed down. And we'll get to more of them if possible, but these are the main ones. Number one, I still want to experiment with this internal rocket bay, right? I still want to try and make this system work. And I've been going back to the drawing board on this thing because one of the reasons why our Steam rocket worked so well, or internal rocket bay for the Steam rocket worked so well, is that it was so simple and easy to use the outputs. And we used all of the outputs. We used the heat and we used the water, right? Because steam was valuable. It was something that we would just put back into our rocket. With a petroleum rocket, the way that we're setting things up right now, is not one that's really going to be utilizing the heat in any major way, right? We're more or less, what we're setting up here is a large number of thermoregulators. They're just going to delete that heat. They're gonna absorb all the heat from this rocket tube, put it into oil and petroleum, and then delete the heat with a refinery or with the rocket itself. That is not going to be that effective, right? Because I think I've talked about this before, but if you're just getting the CO2 from this rocket tube, it's not good enough, right? Or it's not worthwhile. It's not useful enough, because you're probably going to get about a ton of CO2 in your rocket tube. Just from my experience, we'll get about 1 ton of CO2 in a rocket tube around this size launching a petroleum rocket. That ton of CO2 doesn't get you much. Like, maybe you're using it to pollute some water using a carbon skimmer, and then you can use that polluted water, you can sieve it up into polluted dirt, and then compost that polluted dirt to get dirt. That way you can have dirt for your sleet wheat production. But this entire rocket launch, right? If I'm only getting 1,000 kilograms, let's say I'm visiting the closest possible asteroid. Let's say I'm visiting the Carbon asteroid, which is going to be 3 cycles away, right? This will be 6, this will be 9, this will be 12, right? I think, if I remember right. Even if we're launching a rocket once every 4 cycles, that means we're getting 250 kilograms of CO2 per cycle. Ultimately this rocket, even on that sort of duty cycle, is only going to support about 7 sleet wheat plants, right? It's only going to provide the dirt for about 7 of them. That's a lot of trouble to go through for not very much, right? There's easier ways of getting the dirt, and we're spending a lot in resources to get there, right? We're going to have to put a lot of steel and all this stuff into this build. There's a lot of ceramic, which for us is actually been really simple because of the way that we've been generating our oxygen here. We've basically just been relying entirely on deodorizers, and it's worked fantastically well. I don't know this is the major success of this, is that we found that algae terrariums are not a noob trap anymore, and in fact are probably the best way to produce your oxygen in the game. Anyways, getting a little bit off topic. So I want to do this, but there's challenges, right? If we're not utilizing the heat, the CO2 alone does not seem like it's enough, right? Even if we took all that CO2 and fed it into some molten slicksters to get petroleum, or fed it into slicksters and then cracked the oil into petroleum, we're not getting enough stuff to justify it, right? We want to make use of that heat as well if we really want to make this design practical, or like a superior alternative, in the way that I think a steam rocket in an internal tube is a superior alternative to a surface-based rocket, right? One exposed to vacuum. If we want to accomplish that, we're going to need to rethink things a little bit. So one of the things I want to be working on in this series, in the future episodes, is I want to work on that. I want to basically create some rocket tubes, or test some ideas to utilize that heat. But there's challenges. One is that things like the gantry and other buildings, like if you just had the entire rocket tube be hot, you're going to have some problems. The gantry is a building that can overheat. It will overheat at the temperatures that are released by the petroleum rocket, which is around 2200 degrees Celsius. So you don't want to have your main rocket tube probably be heated. We're going to try, I think, one where we have the rocket tube stay hot, and another one where we have everything above the rocket launch platform cooled, but then this area right here basically is going to be hot. And I think what we're going to try and do is use this to turn crude oil into petroleum without using any space materials. So that's one of the first thing I want to work on. Internal rocket bay with a cooled sort of rocket area, but using the heat to try and to boil some crude oil into petroleum. That's experiment number 1. Experiment number 2, and this is getting into the content that's going to be released in the next update, which is just sort of some tweaks and modifications to the game. Number 2 is they are reworking the steam turbine, which I think everybody kind of knew was going to happen, which is why in our base we have no steam turbines, because I didn't want to have parts of my base break in case they changed it. They are changing it. They're being pretty kind about things, though, and they're making it, I think, so that any steam turbines you built will stay working the way that they currently work. But basically, there's going to be another building. It's going to be like the steam turbine. The steam turbine you're not going to be able to build anymore, and it's going to work differently. And so the second thing I want to work on is another interior rocket silo design, but maybe having the entire rocket tube be heated and utilizing these turbines in some fashion. I don't quite know how these turbines work yet. I need to experiment around with the test branch, but I do still want to continue the experiment. I'm still kind of at the position right now that it's probably not worth it to have an interior rocket bay. I'm guessing that having your entire rocket silo heat up is going to be a bad thing, just because there's things in here that you don't want to break. The gantry, for example, overheating seems to be a recurring problem. I mean, either that or I need to accept that I'm going to load a duplicate into the rocket and then just keep them in the rocket for the rest of time. That is a possibility. They don't get hungry or need oxygen or anything like that while they're in the command module, but I don't like that solution just for sort of aesthetic reasons. I don't know. I'm a bit of a role player, I guess. But anyways, so there's issues with having the entire rocket tube be heated. Probably my guess is I'm going to come to the conclusion that it's perfectly fine to have this part, right, this area right here, be interior. That this area you can try and utilize that heat somehow, right? Because the exhaust will go through layers of whatever you put here, and you can have this area heat up. But the rest of this, you probably don't want to have heated up. You probably just want to cool it down, and it's probably a lot easier to just let it vent off into space than it is to actually have this huge cooling apparatus to deal with this. That's my guess as to what the conclusion of the experiment is going to be, but I want to try it out nonetheless. Designing a rocket tube, since we already kind of have this set up, one where we have this area utilizing the heat and the rest being cooled, and then another one which we'll build, I don't know, somewhere over here or somewhere else, where we have a different system where the entire rocket tube is allowed to heat, and we see if we can make that useful. Okay, so that's two big things. The next big thing, I want to work on a design for a pre-space materials oil boiler. And not using the rocket heat, but instead using magma. And sort of the idea is, it's pretty easy to boil oil into petroleum. I mean, it's super easy actually to boil oil into petroleum once you have space materials. You just use some thermium or niobium, I guess, if you didn't want to refine it. But you basically use some thermium plus some supercoolant, and voila, you're just heating up the oil into petroleum, and then pumping it out once it becomes petroleum. Pretty dead simple. A little bit more complicated is the process wherein you take your oil and you boil it into petroleum, or I guess you're not boiling it, but you refine it into petroleum using the heat, and then you boil that petroleum into sour gas, and then you cool off that sour gas to condense it into methane and sulfur, and then you pump out the methane and sulfur, probably just vent the sulfur out somewhere after using it to absorb some heat. And then you take the methane, you let it evaporate, right? Or you let it sort of boil off and become natural gas, and then you run the natural gas through natural gas generators, right? That is a little bit more complicated to build, but it's still, I mean, there are tons of designs out there if you want to look at them for doing this once you have space materials, right? Once you have access to thermium, once you have access to insulation, once you have access to supercoolant, this is all pretty simple stuff, right? It's, you heat up this area to this temperature, then you cool it down to this temperature, set up some pumps, good to go. I mean, I think more of the challenges is making it look good, right? Getting a high throughput and making it look good. So I'm not super interested in doing that. I'm more interested in, what if you don't have access to space materials? What if you're trying to jumpstart your space program? What if you're trying to gain access to your petroleum without having to to do anything really complicated, right? Is that possible? Is that doable? And so one of the next things I want to try is, and the emphasis is going to be on simple setups that don't require a lot of duplicate manpower, right? Because this, the idea of this is going to be, it's something that you would do sort of in the early to mid game. But if you dug down to the petroleum, if you dug down to the oil biome really quickly, is it possible, I mean, presumably with some Atmos suits, because just the temperature of the oil biome alone is whatever. So you'll need to set that up. But is it possible to set up just a simple system that will boil your oil into sour gas, and then you can condense it to create natural gas, right? Because this map, of course, has a lot of polluted water, right? It has a lot of water in general. We have 2 cool slush geysers here. We have 1 more to the northeast. We have cool steam vent here, cool steam vent here, and then we have a 3rd cool steam vent. You're kind of guaranteed 2 cool steam vents every run. So a third, like 2 is normal, but we have a 3rd cool steam vent over here, which we haven't even used. We're just awash in water. But some maps, you're not going to have that, right? Some maps, you might not run into a cool slush geyser, and you're going to have some serious issues keeping all of your stuff supplied with water. Generating natural gas in a really easy fashion is something that's really important because it is going to allow you to run natural gas generators, which will start generating all of your polluted water for you. And because you can just control the temperature of these natural gas generators, you can output that polluted water at whatever you want. It's like you're able to create your own sort of mini cool slush geyser. So I'm really interested in going after builds that are really simple. The emphasis, we're probably just going to mess up a lot of this area down here, but I think it's worth doing the experiment for future runs. Setting things up in a really simple fashion to try and boil crude oil into sour gas and then condense it down. So that's another thing I want to be working on, pre-space oil boilers. After that, there's really only 2 other things I think we might have time for, just kind of if I draw up a schedule. One is ranch designs, another sort of experiment that I want to work on. So we have these ranches right here, and they're really simple and easy. I mean, we set this one up not too difficult. I mean, we kind of, these liquid locks aren't even necessary, right? Because probably when we want to go in here, we want to go in with Atmos suits, right? So they don't have to hold their breath while they're working the grooming station. So right, this could have been a much simpler liquid lock, but I kind of wanted to show off this style of liquid lock because I think it looks a lot cooler than the others, but also just because I hadn't done it yet anywhere in the base. However, this system is fairly inefficient for a number of reasons, right? It's efficient in a couple regards, but in a lot of others, we got problems. So number one, there's a long travel time for the Drecos to get to this grooming station, right? Because there's no way for them to drop down from the ceiling onto the ground. So if they're, like right here, they're gonna have to walk all the way around to get to this grooming station. Drecos are pretty slow creatures, right? Even if it's just our guys here and the Dreco is here, that's a pretty long walk for a Dreco. So I'd kind of like to play around with, I mean, we might not even just set up Dreco ranches, right? We might just play around with various ideas, but I kind of want to see if there's ways to design ranches that are a little bit more efficient in that. Maybe the answer is just that we build our ranches smaller, but that's going to be one aspect of it. The other aspect of it that I want to work on is, this one is basically just to grow phosphorite, right? It's phosphorite so that we can supply our pinch pepper nuts for our hydroponic farms up here. There's nothing else much to it. It's going to provide some meat and eggs, which are nice, but mainly it's making sure that this is a renewable process, right? It's a little bit overkill for that, but whatever. If we want to get other stuff from Drecos, we need a different room, right? We need a room, one that has hydrogen in it. That way they will grow back their fur, so to speak. And we also might need different plants in here because glossy Drecos you breed glossy Drekos by growing mealwood and having them eat the mealwood rather than having them eat balm lilies, right? So there is something of a challenge there in that we want to create a room. Like, we can tackle this a number of different ways. We could have a ranch which is just all sort of just CO2 or something, and then put mealwood in here, have the Drekos eat that, turn into glossy Drekos. Once they turn into glossy Drekos, we move them to another room where they eat, say, pinch pepper nut or something like that. But we need a couple things here. One is that we need to have different plants if we want to get glossy Drekos. Another one is that we need hydrogen over an area of the room. That way the Drekos will grow back their coats. So I want to play around, if we have time, after the other sort of 3 experiments, 3, 4, depending upon how we're counting whatever number of pre-space oil boilers we try and work on. I want to work a little bit on that ranching and see if we can't get that to work in a cool way. And the other one is sort of just base beautification. This is a pretty ugly base right now, at least by my standards. I mean, it's a pretty ugly base. We have a lot of unfinished things lying about. We have all this clutter in a ton of areas, right? Just got random storage in a lot of areas. We have large unused areas. We have sort of defunct industrial areas. Some people just don't like this setup sort of thing, with a bunch of liquid storage, bunch of gas storage lying around. They prefer to use sort of compressed liquid, compressed air type setups. I'm less sold on them. I think they're a little bit exploity. I mainly worry that they will patch things and then your base will just explode, right? Like literally, your tiles will be blown apart by you having 100,000 kilograms of air pressure in a one tile area or something. But I don't know. There's still just a lot of things we want to beautify about this base. And so that's another thing that I kind of want to work on a little bit. But let me also talk about the patch that's coming in a few weeks, roughly 3 weeks. There are going to be sort of 2 major play changes in my view. Number 1 is that they are reworking germs and immunity. So part of me says, just for safety's sake, we should clean out this room, right? We've had this room just full of slime lung germs. I also just kind of want to keep this room as an experiment, right? Just keep some duplicants sort of sleeping here and use them as test subjects. What if you lived in an area that had these germs? How often would duplicants get sick under the new system? Because there's not going to be an immune system anymore. The downsides of getting infected are lower, right? It's not as severe, but the chances are much higher because the way they're setting it up, every time they have contact with a germ, they will have some chance of acquiring the disease, right? And it will need to be treated. So I kind of want to work a little bit on this. I want to do some medbay testing type stuff with their new systems there. And the other thing that we talked about a little bit before was steam turbines. The steam turbine rework, I think, was just, everybody saw it coming. Steam turbines were only ever used for their exploity reasons. Were pretty much never used in the intended way because the intended way was so inefficient. Anyways, so we're going to play around, I think, with that patch, and we're going to do some stuff. But I think I only plan on playing at least this save, like maybe a couple weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks after that patch hits, to sort of test out some new stuff. So the plan is, from here on out, there's about 6 weeks tops, maybe 5 weeks left of play here. And I want to focus on testing out the new stuff that they have in the patch that comes in a few weeks, and then doing our experimental builds. And in the meantime, so while we're kind of waiting for things to build, I also would like to discuss sort of 2 subjects near and dear to my heart. One is ideas for DLC for this game. There is going to be new content released with the release. 3 new biomes and a bunch of new critters, they said. I also have, I guess, some ideas about what they could do for future DLC. They've discussed that. They've said that basically from here on out, after release, their programmers are going to work on DLC content as opposed to updates to the game. That's where they're going to shift a lot of their team. I kind of want to bounce some ideas off of people. The other thing I want to talk about is plans for changing the game as it stands, because I think the steam turbine removal was necessary. It was both too good and too bad of a building at the same time. But I kind of want to discuss little rebalancing things that I think need to be done to the game, right? Like, there's too much regolith, and power is too cheap, and deodorizers are way too efficient, and a variety of things like that. Things that I think would improve the gameplay experience, and not. I think they would just straight up improve the gameplay experience. Okay, so to summarize. Game is going to be released in about 2 months. I'm probably going to play this save for another 5 weeks or so. In that time, even though there are dozens of things I want to do, I think we're going to focus on a small set of experiments as our ongoing projects. 2 different designs of internal rocket bays. One pre-patch, basically just utilizing this area down here to try and turn some oil into petroleum, and also a post-patch internal rocket bay where we try and utilize or play around with the steam turbines a little bit more. And then some pre-space oil boilers, just ideally quick and simple things that we can set up in the oil biome using magma to generate a lot of natural gas early on in the game. I'm talking like cycle 200 tops is when we want to have just tons of natural gas to power everything we want around the base and get a lot of polluted water. That's the goal. If there's an easy way to do that in survival mode, I want to tackle it. And then after that, if we have time, playing around with ranch designs. What's easy to build in survival mode, what's effective and efficient, so on and so forth. And maybe just clean up the base a little bit so it doesn't look so sloppy, so I can have like a nice base overview type thing. That's what we're going to be doing. In addition, we're going to talk about DLC that I'd like to see added to the game and balance changes that I'd like to see added to the game. And that's the plan. So not much gameplay. I mean, really no gameplay. This is just a talking episode, an intermission to sort of explain where the series is going from here. I guess I will also add that I do plan on, of course, playing the game when it releases. And I've had a lot of fun, actually, doing this series. It's very different from how I usually play the game, where I kind of set things up and then do a bunch of build orders and then kind of just walk away for like 10 cycles. Till the build orders are completed. This sort of long form let's play is been interesting. I don't know. I'm maybe going to play around with what I do, and I would invite feedback for what you guys think would be more entertaining for you, because I'm also kind of thinking now about what I would change from my end on to make things better for me. If there's ways to do this that I would enjoy more. I don't know, but I've had a pretty good time recording the series, and so I think I'm going to try it again for the release of the game. And yeah, that's it for this intermission. Went a little bit long, but hopefully got a lot of information out there for anybody who's watching the channel and enjoying this Let's Play. Okay, going to cut things here. I'll catch you guys next time. Have fun.